Awesome. Well, I think we're good to get started here. Hi, everybody. My name is Corey Lawrence. Thank you for joining us. I'm one of the organizers of DC Startup Week here, and I'm coming to you live from WeWork in downtown Washington, DC. DC Startup Week is a year-round organization, but we also have our 5-day conference, which you guys are a part of here, that happens every September, focused on building the startup community. We want to give a quick shout out to our title sponsors, Next, Insperity, WIS, and Technology Rivers. Thank you for making this week possible. If you guys have any questions throughout the talk, please put in all caps question at the start of your chat, so that way we don't miss any of your really great questions for Aaron. And we're so excited to have Aaron Saunders speaking on So You Want to Build a Mobile App. Aaron Saunders is an award-winning tech entrepreneur and author who has founded and successfully built multiple startups. He is currently the founder and CEO of Clearly Innovative Inc. and the Inclusive Innovation Incubator. So please join me in welcoming Aaron to the DC Startup Week stage.
All right, thank you everyone for taking your time today to come listen to what I have to say. I'm going to try my best to get through the slides as quickly as I can, but at a decent pace. This talk is normally done with a live audience because the idea is to drive, to provide as much information as I can to the audience, but also to drive the discussion around what your specific needs are, which is normally done through Q&A. So as I said, I'll go through the slides quickly. If there's specific questions you have, please kind of leave them in the chat, and because I think that's really where the value is for everyone with the Q&A. So, and the final thing is I will post all of these slides so that you guys can have access to them for reference later. So you want to build a mobile app. So first, a little bit about myself. I'm, as I mentioned, CEO of Clearly Innovative Inc. And Inclusive Innovation Incubator. I have over 30 years of software development experience. I survived the first .com bubble. I worked on the first DisneyStore.com, Nike Store, Toys R Us. Also spent some time in Europe working on the first Marks and Spencers.com. So I have a fair bit of experience building large e-commerce websites and large websites. And really, I've just seen a lot over the 30 plus years of experience that I've been in the space. I'm here in DC with Clearly Innovative, which I started 10 years ago. Our largest client right now is the National Museum of African American History and Culture. We've built a mobile solution for them for their launch, and we've been their mobile partner since they've launched. We've done other large projects for Red Cross, Queens Public Library, NAACP Image Awards. But kind of like my sweet spot is working with entrepreneurs and startups who are trying to figure out how to build some sort of solution on a very limited budget, just to validate that their vision or that their dream of what they want to do is worthwhile. And so that's really where we're focused on. This talk really is to provide information, access to a resource about building their first mobile app or mobile solution. So there's some key takeaways from my talk, which are reference points, is really about kind of this MVP or what's the other word people use, minimum marketing product. To me, it's basically, in layman's terms, what I like to say is it's that first release that you're pushing out. But what we encourage entrepreneurs is to clearly understand what the assumptions you've made about your product are and your target market. And this first release, the purpose of it is to validate those assumptions. And so that's why it's extremely critical that you know what your assumptions are and what your target market is before you really get started in developing your solution. Because without that, to me, it's just not an efficient use of your money. The primary point that I'm going to make here, which is probably the primary point I'm going to make here really is that in most cases, and as I have most in bold, there are more cost-effective ways to build the initial MVP of your mobile solution other than to pay the premium for a native iOS or a native Android application, which is, matter of fact, is that those resources are just more expensive than JavaScript resources, which is kind of the approach that we use at Clearly Innovative. The other thing that I'll state so that I don't get hate mail or kind of people DMing me later is there are things here that are facts, that I've just learned through my experience, and there are other things that are just purely my opinion. Anything that is my opinion, I will provide an opinion warning beforehand. You can choose to agree or disagree with me. It's just my opinion. So the first, and a couple of key points here. Building a mobile application is building a mobile application is not building a company. It's literally just an app. And it's one of the things that we have to spend a fair bit of time with entrepreneurs early on, is helping them understand there's just a whole lot more to the whole company and the whole product than just a mobile app. Another thing is that I know there's this mantra about build, build, build that a lot of entrepreneurs get fed. But what we have found is that there should definitely be a split in the effort. 50% of effort should be on building the solution, and 50% should be validating what you're building to ensure that it's what your market wants. The worst case scenario of not taking this approach is spending a lot of time and money building something that nobody wants. Like they say, don't fall in love with your baby. Your application is, as I said early on, it's really just an attempt to validate things in the first few releases. And so that's why you have to split your effort between building it and validating. Another thing that I say, and this is kind of my opinion also, I met a lot of entrepreneurs who are extremely focused on, is my solution scalable, when they don't have a single paying client yet. Technology has advanced dramatically over the last 10 to 15 years, where when you first start out, I really, this is my opinion, don't believe a lot of time and effort should be focused on, will my app scale to like 100,000 users? You don't have a paying customer yet. You haven't validated what you're doing yet. Scaling should not be a high priority at this early stage. And I'll talk a little bit more later on why that's critical. A couple of questions that we ask folks when they first come in to talk to us about their solution, and that we ask you, that we encourage you to ask yourself. What is the application validating in the initial phase? That is extremely critical. When entrepreneurs come up with their vision for their solution, they have, usually we find people who have a very high number of features that they believe are critical to the success of their product. We strongly encourage them to prioritize those, and for all of those features, be able to identify how they could validate if that was a feature that their target audience really wants. And that ties into the second one, which is, how are you measuring success? Startups are usually about resilience. And a lot of resilience comes down to how much money do you have to spend to survive. So you need to spend your money efficiently. And to spend your money efficiently, you need to know how you measure success. So identifying what success looks like before you get too far in this journey is critical to using your money efficiently and being resilient and being able to survive. Another one, which seems obvious, but when I really drill down with clients about it, it's having a very clear understanding of what the requirements are for the application. And that's almost to the level of being able to explain it to a child, right? And that's a non-technical requirement that I strongly encourage founders and entrepreneurs to just spend a lot of time clearly understanding what they believe the requirements are for the application. Another thing is finding a resource or someone to help you understand what technology solutions are out there to build the app, what's out there to build the back end of the solution, which I'll define that a little bit later on. And then also the other thing that people usually forget about is, what resources do you have to support the app after it's built, right? An app is not a fire and forget. You will deploy your app to the App Store, you will launch your website, and within days you will find bugs, you will have people giving you feedback, and that feedback will need to get resolved very quickly or people will not come back. What we find often is that people budget what it takes to build the first phase of their app, and that's all they budget. And so by the second or third week, when they have bugs and then they have issues, they haven't allocated budget to support that, and they're almost dead on arrival. So these are things that you want to kind of keep in mind before you start this journey. I mean, another thing we find is that there's a lot of non-technical concerns that you should spend some time on before you run out and try to pay someone or find someone to build your app. And a lot of this comes to around sales, marketing, customer acquisition. And I like to say it by basically who is the target audience for your application and product. And then another point which you should spend some time on is like who, and it ties into the next one, is like who's the target audience for the initial phase of your app, right? What you'll find at times is sometimes there's your kind of the, as what they say in marketing terms, like there's the early adopter for your app who will, your app or your solution. And also I will use app very loosely to cover your solution, your website, or whatever is the first, technical product you're building. So what is it validating in the initial phase? Can you meet those requirements? Is it enough to get your early adopters on board who will then potentially be ambassadors to kind of help other folks find out about your app, get involved, and get excited about it? As I said earlier, what are the requirements of your app? That's a non-technical concern. And then, once again, touching on what are the resources that you have to support the app afterwards. And that's not only like technical support, but are you going to have a support line where people can call in or people can send an email if they have a question about your app? Are you going to have some sort of social media strategy to promote your app on social media? Like who are the resources that are supporting that? So these are things that you need to keep in mind before you get too far down the road. So the first thing is like who will build your app. So a couple of choices are your own technology team. You can identify contractors. You can identify developer shop. You can outsource your development team or through a development individual, or you can try and build it yourself. There's ups and downs with all of the different options. And I think it depends upon the amount of capital you have, what your level of understanding of technology is, and also, where you think your product is from a level of complexity regarding technology, if that makes sense. I mean, if it doesn't make sense, someone can mark that as a question and I'll try and answer it a little bit clearer at the end. We've met with entrepreneurs who usually are in the contractor dev shop outsource development team. Just some thoughts that I have. Contractor is good, but what you need to understand, if the contractor is an individual, they are an individual. So not only are they building your solution, they're also doing their own biz dev. They're doing all the other things that they need to do. And the other thing is about 75, between 50 to, I'll say between 50 to 75% of the way through your project, they have to be doing biz dev to find their next project. So they have to eat. So you should keep that in mind when you're using a contractor to understand kind of the level of commitment that they have and will they see you all the way to the finish line. With the developer shop, that risk is mitigated a little bit more. The assumption is they are more than one person on their team, that they probably have resources that are also doing business development and other things for them. So the development shop can commit more of their specific time and energy to support you. Outsourced development team / outsourced individual, very similar to some of the challenges you have with contractors. There's a fair number of people who have had success with outsourcing, and what I mean outsourcing, i.e. offshoring their development work. But there's also a fair number of people who've got burned by offshoring their development work. The suggestion that I give to folks are that A, get a lot of references if you're going to offshore your development work, and B, recognize that sometimes there's an additional management cost that you have associated with managing an offshore development team by yourself. And so these are, once again, non-technical costs that you need to account for if you want to go with an outsourced development team. And then the final one is building it yourself. If you're a startup founder and you have technical skills and you want to try to build it yourself, you need to understand then that all the other things that you might want to be doing as a founder, you can't be doing because you're busy building your application. And so it's a trade-off that you need to make. What technology is out there to build the app? So kind of one of the new kids on the block is this technology called progressive web apps, which are, they're trying to sit between a native app and a website. They're primarily designed to look, feel, and act like a a mobile application on your mobile device, but they basically are websites that are leveraging advancements in technology in browsers to give you mobile device-like performance. So for example, with progressive web apps now, you can do push notifications, which was one of the big missing links before between websites and mobile applications. Progressive web apps can also work offline when done properly. Progressive web apps can also, most of them, they try to kind of get you to your launch screen in under a second time. They also run very well on low performance machines, which is kind of another kick against native mobile applications, is they're getting heavy. They require a lot of performance power. There are a lot of people in this world that don't have what I like to call smartphones that can kind of handle the heavy weight of a lot of native apps that are coming here. And then another critical thing is that it's easier to get access to development resources. Progressive web apps are built using web technology, i.e. JavaScript. The reality is JavaScript resources are less expensive than native developers, and so it's easier to get access to resources. Also, if you're in a small company, you probably already have a web resource who's working on a website for you, and a lot of those skills can come across for progressive web apps. Another big thing is progressive web apps do not need to go into the App Store. So there's a much smoother, frictionless transition from when the person's interested in your solution to when they actually can run your solution, because they don't need to go to your website, then click a button, then go to the App Store, then download your app. They literally can click a button on their phone on your website and have the progressive web app deployed like a mobile app on your phone, i.e. put a little icon on your home screen and just go. The cons are it's not native. Certain native experiences aren't available. And depending upon the complexity of your app and the things you're trying to do, sometimes it just doesn't work well as a website. The next one is a big one that a lot more people are looking into, and I'm lumping them kind of together as hybrid native solutions. And so examples of them are React Native, Flutter, Xamarin, Ionic Framework, which is what we use a lot, and then there's also NativeScript. To talk about the pros, once again, the leveraging web skills is always important. People usually can find them a lot easier than they can find native developers. This is something that I'm going to try my best to explain it. If there's a question, someone can ask later. Native hybrid solutions have a combination of, they can either render the native user interface elements. And so what that means is that although they're built using web technologies, when the button is drawn on the screen or a menu is shown, it is actually the native device's button versus just a web page fake pretending to draw a button. Hybrid solutions also have access to native device functionality way more than most progressive web apps. And also you can share code across platforms in some scenarios. Once again, the cons are it's not native. It's not viable for all solutions. And then once again, it does require App Store approval and deployment. A little bit of a deeper dive on the differences between these hybrid native solutions. So the web-based solutions like Ionic, Cordova, and the real old timers who remember PhoneGap, what they do is they render HTML elements to give you the illusion that it is a native device. But in reality, it is still just a website that's running, for lack of a better word, in a container that gives it access to your phone, your context, and other native features on your phone. But it is still really just a website. The other tools like React Native, Xamarin, and Flutter, well, Flutter's a little bit different, but React Native and Xamarin, they do this interesting thing where you write your logic in your language you're comfortable with. So with React Native, it's JavaScript. With Xamarin, I believe it's C Sharp. But there's this, they have, for lack of a better word, this bridge technology. So when you say, draw me a button in the coding language, it goes through a bridge and it tells the mobile device, draw me your native button. As opposed to the web-based solutions, they would just draw a button using HTML that kind of looks like it's native. These other solutions are actively making calls to native user interface elements on your device, platform specific, to give you the native elements versus a rendering of a native element. And that's what we're talking about with the bridge technology to kind of make the calls between the JavaScript calls and the native calls. And once again, feel free to ask a question in the end. I can dig deeper into that. It's usually one of the more confusing parts of this talk that I give. And then finally, you get back to your native solutions. Challenges with the native solutions, they're written for specific platforms. So what that means is for iOS and Android. Usually, the resources are usually more expensive. In some cases, they're separate teams, one team to build the Apple iOS solution, one team to build the Google solution. And so there's additional costs associated with that. This, like I said, written different languages, multiple code bases. And in the end, from my experience and from what I've seen, it can be more difficult and expensive to maintain. We have worked with some clients who have started with either a hybrid solution, and then once they reach a certain level of traction and got more money, they've transitioned to a native solution. So it's really about how much money you have, what your comfort level is, and what access you have to resources. I think, as I said in the beginning, one of the primary points I want to drive home is that there are options to native that can work for you and help you kind of meet your needs early on in your product. And so you shouldn't feel like, if I don't build a native app, I'm going to have a horrible solution. So here's one of my opinion warnings. If it's done properly, most customers won't even know the difference. Like they won't know that it's an app built with PhoneGap or that it's built with Flutter or native. Most clients, customers, users won't really know the difference. And the reality is, if you're adding the value that you need, most of them won't care. So when you're trying to identify a contractor or a shop or whatever to build it, most people are going to try to sell you what they know. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the best solution. It's just what they know. They're either a native shop, and so they write everything native, or they're a web shop and they write everything with web. And so this talk is just really about giving you knowledge to help make a decision. Some other miscellaneous considerations that we found that we usually have to kind of force clients to recognize. Deploying your app without analytics is one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen clients make. You need data to drive your decisions. What we stated early on is that the first couple of releases are validating assumptions about your product decisions, your target audience, how they're responding to your solution, and without data, you're guessing. We pretty much put we pretty much put analytics in every solution that we deploy because we believe that it's helpful to the clients. Crash reporting is another one that we've tried our best to get into all of our clients' app. Not all of our clients, go for it. What does crash reporting mean? Crash reporting means I deployed my app tomorrow, and it's crashing when people launch it. There's literally no way for me to know that unless someone's going to send me a nasty email or post it on Twitter, hey, I downloaded your app and it's crashing. There's technology that exists for you to include crash reporting in your application where you can be notified when your app is crashing. It will tell you where it's crashing, when it's crashing, how often it's crashing. It will give you device-specific information, just ways to quickly address the issues around your application crashing. One thing that I believe is important for folks to recognize is that people download a lot of apps, but people don't use a lot of apps. And if they download your app and it crashes, the high likelihood that they will delete it and never open it up again. And so having data on crashes, having app analytics, just help you inform your decision and help ensure that you get a successful product to market. Once again, why does all this matter? Because remember, the focus of this talk is for entrepreneurs, small business owners, founders, when they're first trying to get started. And to me, companies die usually because they run out of money, and so being able to effectively spend your money early on, tech is probably one of your largest costs. And so you want to be able to manage it as best you can. You need to have the appropriate information to make those decisions. As I said, in my opinion, I believe native is usually the most expensive. Some folks might disagree. I've just found that it is the most expensive. Since remember, we're splitting our time between clearly identifying our market, our target audience, and trying to validate that, which is a cost. We also are spending money on development, which should be driven by that feedback. Every dollar that's saved on development can be utilized to help validate that what you're developing is the right thing to develop. The same kind of point would spend as little as possible. You're still learning. And then finally, you still need to build the back end of the system. And so that's where we'll move on to back end. And what technology is out there to build the back end. So first we'll start with what is the back end. I'll use a common example. Instagram's backend hosts all of the images, all of the content, all of your favorites, all of your followers are stored in, for lack of a better word, a database in the backend. Someone needs to build that. Someone needs to manage that. Someone needs to be able to look at it. Someone needs to be able to give reports out of it. It is, or another way to look at it, it is the content and the data that your mobile app is just using as a presentation. Your mobile solution or your website is presenting data to a user in a hopefully a pleasant way that they like to interact with it, but that data is stored somewhere, and the relationships between that data is all managed somewhere. That is the back end of your system. When we work with clients, we like to help them understand, quote, the business objects that are supporting their system and the relationships that they have with each other. That's the stuff that's stored in the back end. Another thing is that when we work with most of our clients, we deliver usually an iOS app, an Android app, and then some sort of an administrative console or content management system to support the whole product. Usually when we talk to clients, when they first come in, they haven't even thought about the back end. They have not thought about administrative consoles. They have not thought about how to manage the content. And so that the cost of that was not even in their initial thought of what it will cost to build a solution, because they think they're just building an app. The app is the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot underneath it, and one of the critical pieces is the back end. So there's a bunch of options for the back end. Another way, like WordPress has a very huge install base. Drupal has a very huge install base. Early on, there were a lot of solutions, mobile solutions that were built on top of those. Those are more content management systems. They expose APIs that allow you to pull data in and out of either WordPress database or Drupal database. I mean, it's not database, a Drupal system or WordPress system. And so that's a basic backend that can be used for some solutions. There are other solutions right now that are known as Backend as a Service, or that's BaaS, or Platform as a Service, PaaS. I'm certain most of you have heard of AWS is an example of that, Amazon Web Services, which is kind of a high-level term used for the multiple services that Amazon supports. Microsoft Azure exists. Google has their services. And then a tool that we use a lot is Google Firebase, which has a bunch of services also support it. we strongly encourage most of the entrepreneurs that we work with to not build their own custom backend initially. Once again, it comes back to cost. If you can get your solution up and running through the first phases, leveraging a platform that already exists, that already has been tested, that has a large community to kind of help you with any issues that you find, and your cost is just a monthly payment that you need to make for that back end, we strongly encourage people to use the hosted platforms. As I said, it comes with additional benefits and functionality. It has a large support system. It has a community. There's interchangeable resources. So there's, in our opinion, going the other route of a custom build hosted solution using either PHP, Node, Express, using a database system like MySQL, using Java as a programming language or JavaScript, MongoDB as your database, or Postgres as your database. These are all separate technologies that need to be brought together. Developers paid, systems designed, tested, validated, which are all drawing away from your cost for your mobile solution, which is your customer-facing solution, where we believe more value is in the initial phases of your application. Your client doesn't know or care what your backend is. All they care about is when they push a button, the system does what it's supposed to do. Hosted platforms, like I've mentioned, they can provide you that competitive advantage to minimize your costs on back-end development, to get your application built out quicker and to iterate quicker early on. Once you stabilize, once you've raised funds, you can transition, you can build your own custom solution and move on. In fact, when we deployed the initial release for the African American History Museum, that was hosted on Firebase. We launched that solution on Firebase, and we made it through the first 2 releases on Firebase, and then we quickly transitioned afterwards to AWS, and a combination of AWS and a custom hosted solution. So it is possible to go that route. Leveraging the hosted platform saved us time, saved us money, saved us testing, it saved us any issues around scalability, because it was all available to us just, swiping your credit card. I kind of snuck and gave my opinion early on, but here it is again. Building your own backend at an early stage of your company or early stage of your product, in my humble opinion, is just simply not an efficient use of limited resources. It takes you down a path where you're spending a bunch of money on something and you're really not sure if you're heading in the right direction yet. It's more expensive to modify it. It's just more expensive to test it. There are more resources. It's just adding more moving parts to a system early on, which I don't believe you need to do. So in conclusion, because as I wanted to get through this with some time for questions, the most critical thing is understanding the requirements for getting started. We've had clients come to us and say, hey, Aaron, I want to build a mobile app and this is what it does. And I asked them, do you have any of these requirements written down? And they have written absolutely nothing down. They don't understand all the objects. They don't even have a clear understanding what their UI is. They just have an idea. We can work with clients when they're at that point, but what you need to understand is that that's a cost. So now you're shifting that cost of analysis to whoever you have building the application. So that's more money that's coming out of you getting the app built, as opposed to you trying to understand some of the requirements yourself, trying to put together, even if they're just sketches or drawings of what you think your user interface might look like. Any work that you can do that's not development work before you engage with a partner will save you money. One of the other things we encourage is this idea of a Frankenstein app, which is where you identify apps that are similar to what you want, or apps that have user interface experiences that you like, and how you would cobble all that together to present your design or what you want your app to be. I strongly encourage folks to do that. The last thing is this understanding of your business objects and relationships of your objects. And so an example for that, I'll use the Instagram example. The objects that you need to understand in that is, you have a photo, you have friends, you have followers, you have comments, you have likes. these are objects in your system, which don't require you to be technical to understand that you need these things, and then spend some time understanding how they relate to each other. This can also help you understand your system better and save you time and money when you engage your resource. And last one, understand your budget. The building, promoting, and supporting, the bug fixes, all of these things are additional costs that you need to account for when you start on this journey. Because in the end, as I've said it a couple of times, most companies, small businesses, organizations die because they run out of money. However you can save your money early on will give you the opportunity to survive longer, the opportunity to validate more, and to just iterate to get your product to where you need it to be successful. Oh, this is my contact information that's up here. I do just take office hours. So that is my email. If anyone's interested in having another 30-minute chat about your specific information, you're free to email me at this email address. I will send you a Calendly link to schedule an appointment. I also have the link for IN3, Clearly Innovative, my software development firm. I also post a fair bit of free technology tutorials around building your own apps or website using React, Angular, Vue.js, and that's at www.fwic, which actually stands for The Future is Written in Code. And then that's my Twitter, so if someone wants to also DM me, hit me up on Twitter, you can hit me that way. And I think I will pause here now to leave us about 15, 20 minutes for any questions that I can try to answer for folks.
Hey, Aaron, we have a bunch of questions here in the chat. So if you take a look, people started their questions out with question at the beginning of their chat.
Okay, let me see if I can figure out how to do this.
You can always stop sharing your screen if it makes it easier too.
Okay. Stop sharing. Okay. What is good question? All right. I think the first one is here from Philip. Do I think creating an app in its native language is better or getting it out there faster using React.js? What would be the best avenue and why? Do you think creating an app in its native? Once again, it depends upon, so Philip, it depends upon you. Are you building the app? Are you paying someone to build the app? Those are two things that matter. And the point is that if you're going to go with the native language, then you have to make a choice, right? So since you can't build an iOS app in Java, you can only you're going to have to either try to build them in parallel, which is one resource trying to build an iOS app and an Android app in native language, or you're going to have to pick one and then hope that one's right. But then when you're trying to validate assumptions, you're missing half the market because you haven't deployed it on both platforms. I'm certain, I'm not that big of a marketing person, but I'm pretty certain that marketers can show you specific data that says there's a type of user that uses an iPhone, and there's a type of user that uses an Android. And so if you're not deployed to both platforms, you're kind of missing half the market. So sounds hard to print. That's not a question. That's not a question. Is it easy to transfer a native hybrid solution to a native solution in the future? So here's my thought on that. If done properly, the value in your solution is the business logic that ties it all together. The business logic can be transferable. Lessons learned from the user interface can be transferable. But you can't, in most cases, you can't just pick up the code from a hybrid native solution and drop it into a native solution currently. But and as the person followed up and said, it's usually there are lessons learned from every time you write an app. You're going to learn lessons, right? So we have clients that we worked with for multiple years, and I would say that every iteration that we do, we're building upon what we've built previously. So I don't feel like we've lost or wasted any time. I don't feel like if you wrote a hybrid native solution and then in year 2 you decided to port it, I don't think that, even if you had to do a complete rewrite, I would not think of that as a wasted time and effort. What tools do I recommend for crash tracking? If you send me an email, I will send you a link. We've used I'm going to say the name wrong. Crashalytics, I think is the name of it. And we've also leveraged tools that come with Firebase by default for us. Hope Aaron is not mad. I'm replying to some questions. No, I'm not mad. Okay. Your opinion. Questions. Question. Can you have too many objects? How do you test and map meeting into your object choices? Too many. So yes, you can have too many objects. That's where you can go through a process of normalization to kind of reduce the objects and find relations. It also depends upon the backend technology that you're using. So if you're using a document store, but if you're using something like MongoDB, Mongo's not really I'm certain there's someone who's going to get upset with me. Mongo's not really about relationships as a pure SQL database is. What you'd find when you're using document stores or Mongo databases, lots of times where they would put a lot more information in one quote business object than you might find if you were using SQL, where they would just have relationships between the objects. So for example, you might find someone who has a database in SQL that has a user table and has an address table, and there's a relationship between the users and the address tables to get the address. When in Mongo, you probably would find that people would not design it that way. They would just embed the address inside of the user object, just because it's the way the system's designed, and it's kind of like a pattern that they would recommend. But yes, you can have too many objects. It's something that I would suggest you try to resolve yourself early on, and then when you identify your technical partner, work with them to kind of reduce the number if there's too many. Question. Have you worked to develop mental health apps? If so, is there any thought on apps versus mobile-friendly websites? My recommendation, based on your budget, is that if there's not a reason to make it an app, don't make it an app. Make it a website. If you feel that people are looking for the app experience, then I would encourage you to look at building a progressive web app or a mobile responsive website that's targeted for mobile devices. That would be the approach that I would make. Is it easier to focus on one mobile platform? I mean, I think I touched on this earlier on about whether it's easier to focus on one mobile platform. Once again, it's about the primary focus of your first release, in my opinion, is to validate your assumptions and identify your target audience. And if you're only on one platform, it's going to be hard, right? Because you're either missing out on Android users or you're missing out on iOS users. And so I really think you need to figure out how to get feedback on both, or acknowledge that I'm not really addressing the whole market because I'm only supporting one platform. By the way, can you use something like Airtable to serve as a cheap in relation to? Yes. So those, I didn't touch on it here, but there's this whole kind of wave of what they're calling low code and no code tools. And Airtable is considered one of them. It's probably one of the first ones that got a lot of traction. You can use something like Airtable to serve as a cheap back-end relational database. Yes. Like these are the type of, strategies that we encourage to minimize your costs up front, right? Because there's basic things you can do with tools like Airtable, tools like Typeform, and other things like that, that can help you validate your solution before you invest more money in building out a custom solution to support it. How do you see in terms of PWA, hybrid native and native? Do you think we would lean into any of those more heavily, or will we live with all of those? I think there's places for all of them. I think that PWAs will continue to get traction just because of the value that they provide, the ability to reuse skills, and just that kind of quick frictionless movement from, hey, I want to get the app on my phone to do something. That you can get from just having a link on a website that you click on your phone, which will deploy a PWA, and then you're up and running, versus going to the App Store. I think there's this ongoing battle right now with Apple and some other companies about app stores taking 30% cut of financial transactions that go to devices. That also push some people towards the PWA kind of web solution. But I think it's going to take a while for this to kind of shake itself out. I mean, when hybrid applications first came out, and when kind of responsive websites first came out, people were saying, oh, the App Store is going to die. People don't need apps. People still use apps. I mean, the data shows that people, even if you build a web solution that looks like a mobile app, the data still shows that people, for some bizarre reason, still prefer the kind of app-like experience. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's a lot of energy still behind the PWA, because it can give you that app-like solution while still leveraging existing web technologies. How do you see the prospects of the mobile app market after COVID-19? I don't understand. I mean, what we have actually seen at Clearly Innovative is like work has picked up for us. People recognize that it will be probably a while before everything shakes out. I won't even say get back to normal, because I don't know what normal is going to be. But what they do know is that people are spending a lot of time on their websites, mobile apps, online, interacting with each other, doing their business. I mean, online has now become a critical part of everyone's life, whether they like it or not. And so I think that creates tons of opportunity for people in the technology space who are providing online solutions to kind of help people meet the needs of their everyday life. I mean, one of the things that we have found and that we're pushing towards is trying to find solutions to help small businesses who are not technically savvy get online, because, I went to get my eyes checked the other day, and they're like only 2 people allowed in the store at a time, right? So small retailers, small shop owners who have to abide by these distances, they're just not getting all that foot traffic. They're not getting people coming in, getting exposed to their solution. And so they need to find other channels to get exposure. And mobile's a very good channel, or a website's a very good channel. But a lot of these folks just simply don't have the technical expertise to figure out how to get it done. And I will start to wrap up here. One of the things, I hear folks who understand some technology, they're like, oh, well, just get Shopify and spin up a website, right? Like, that's not it for everybody. Like, there's a huge segment of society who just are not technically savvy yet. And even the idea of, hey, just spin up a website, or hey, just use WordPress. Think about what I just said. Even if you were able to get that up and done, you now need to maintain it. You now need to support it. All the issues that come with hosting a technology platform, you've now brought upon yourself. And if you redefine what a small business is away from what SBA says, so basically any business under 500 people is a small business, right? I'm talking about the 5 to 10 person shop, or the 5-person shop, who doesn't have a technology team, who's trying to survive now in this COVID world, right? Like, they're not going to run out and spin up a Spotify, not a Spotify, a Shopify or a website or a Squarespace or one of those. It's like that's, in my opinion, there's a segment of the market that's not the answer. And so we need to figure out, what's going to happen to those businesses. And that's one of the things we're trying to do. And this last one is this apps without code. And that'll be the last one I answer since we're running out of time. So I've run into this for a while over the last couple of years, and my opinion on apps without code are that it can solve some problems, but not all problems. And you need to step back and ask yourself, what are you getting for what you pay, right? So you are still building something. I don't really understand when people say it's an app without a code or it's low code. You still need to build something. You still need to code something. People have been coding Excel spreadsheets for years. It's coding, but they won't say they're developers. Putting together an app requires you to do something that's very similar to coding. And you need to understand it, and you need to be able to pay for it. How far along it can take you, I don't know. And that's a question that you would have to answer yourself. But the one thing that I can assure you is that a lot of these tools, yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that because I don't want to get into kind of a religious battle about apps without code. And I think that's it. I will. Is there a way for me to just for this last part to just put my contact information back up? So
Yeah, if you just want to share your screen again, you can put your contact information back up on the screen. And we want to thank Aaron for this amazing talk on how to build apps. I know I am not a technical founder, but I learned a lot, and I hope you guys did as well. And we appreciate your time and support of the DC Startup Week community. Today at the 4 o'clock hour, we've got some more talks coming up, really exciting. We've got Finding Flow and Preventing Burnout, a Startup Week mini design sprint. We've got growth through government agency partnerships and contracts. And we also have inclusive event design for the creative economy. So would love to see you guys at some of our 4 o'clock talks, and we'll chat with you guys soon. Thank you.